Welcome to the Truth and Fertility Podcast. I'm Haley, wife, mom, and a fertility charting instructor, here to teach you the undeniable truth about your fertility. So let's get started. Welcome back to the Truth and Fertility Podcast. Today, I am sitting down with Jamie Rathjen. She is a co-host of the Hormone Genius Podcast, and she also is the founder of the Fiat Institute. And she and I have known each other actually not well, but we've known of each other for the last few years. She has a hormone coaching program that we are going to dive deep into, which is such a blessing for all women that are trying to find health in the hormone space. And so I've known her from that. I've known her from the podcast world. I've known her from, restorative reproductive medicine world, just this whole world. So I'm so excited to have her on today. We're going to be chatting all about hormones. You guys, she's like the hormone expert. So this is going to be such a blessing, a blessed conversation for everybody who is interested in hormones. So Jamie, without further ado, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your hormone coaching program, what you do, your podcast, and then we'll get right into it.
Awesome, Haley. Well, thank you so much for having me on. For those of you listening to this episode, I encourage you to also listen to Haley's episode on our podcast. We just interviewed Haley not long ago. I think, was it in the summer, Haley?
It was last summer. Yeah.
Last summer.
So a few months ago.
Last summer. Yes. And we remember how well spoken you were, Haley. You are just a light. You are a light. You know, it comes from the heart. So I just want to say thank you for having me on. It is true. I am a major hormone nerd. It wasn't always that way. So, growing up in high school, I was totally awkward. I felt very uncomfortable in my female body, totally uncomfortable. I hated, dresses and bras and like anything that indicated like woman. Actually, even as a little girl, I always felt so uncomfortable, like people just looking at me. I didn't like it. So it's very interesting and funny how now my whole world is not only just talking about womanhood and hormones, but things like cervical mucus. Like how much less, like how on earth did I come around to not even being able to be comfortable talking about breasts? I called them chestal units in high school. I couldn't even see it. Haley, I couldn't say breasts. I said chestal units. Like, what on earth?
That's a trademark name, that's for sure.
Yeah, I know. That's like kind of creative, actually. So I went from that to now like being a super pumped about cervical mucus and super pumped about the way our hormones communicate to us through our cycle and through other ways. And so again, I'm just so honored to be here with you today, Haley.
Awesome. Well, talking about hormones. Jamie, what I want to know first is, because in my space, right, with fertility charting, I talk about reproductive hormones all the time. We talk about estrogen and progesterone. We talk about follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, all of these like reproductive hormones. So when you talk about being a hormone nerd and you're loving hormones, are those the hormones you're talking about, reproductive hormones, or are you talking more in like what type of hormones are you talking about that you nerd out about, love about, and see a need for women to know more about?
Yeah. Well, my love for hormones started off with those sex hormones you just mentioned. The reproductive hormones we think about, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, LH, FSH, all those things. But then when I started working with women, so I'm a fertility care practitioner. And so when working with women and their cycles and their chart, I would notice that, I'm going to use the example of low progesterone. So for your listeners, just a reminder, you have your day one starts with the first day of your period. You did not get pregnant from the cycle before, so your uterine lining sloughs, so that your body can, amp up to the main event. Main event is ovulation. So you get your period, and then a number of days following, typically you notice a characteristic type of discharge, which is induced by estrogen, and you see cervical mucus. And then after you ovulate, then you notice dryness at the labia, and now progesterone is the dominant hormone. That's like super high level reminder for people listening. So progesterone, for instance, I might be working with a woman in her chart and see that she has a short luteal phase, the number of days after ovulation to the day before the next period, which again can be caused by low progesterone. So what would happen is these women would come, and different women, different stories, different lifestyle, and they may be coming to me with kind of similar patterns of short luteal phase, maybe brown spotting before the period, which are PMS, all indicate potentially low progesterone. And then I started thinking, these women all have different stories. They all have different lifestyle, yet their chart tells me there's patterns of low progesterone. Of course, they need to see a doctor to get that verified. So I started wondering, well, what causes low progesterone? Often in this world, we like to, throw progesterone at things, which I love for progesterone to be thrown at me. I love progesterone. I think it's a great hormone, to supplement your health, to supplement your cycle after ovulation. But there's just this nagging question of, why is my progesterone low? Like, am I going to need to take progesterone, like myself in my own cycle and with the clients I'm seeing? It felt like the only answer I was giving them was progesterone. But every woman was different. Because she has a different story and a lifestyle. How is that one answer the same for all of them? Kind of like what we think about with birth control in a way.
That's what I was just thinking about. Like, the pill is just thrown at people for different reasons. Yeah.
Right. And like with birth control, it shuts down the reproductive pathways from the brain to the ovaries. So in that way, it's different because it shuts the system down, and progesterone doesn't. But the kind of the annoying part of it was that it's still not answering a question. Birth control isn't answering a question if we're taking it for a health reason. Neither really is progesterone, besides just satisfying that it was low in the first place. So to answer your question, you asked, what are other hormones at play? Well, one hormone that is a hormone we think about a lot, and I think it affects us more than maybe many of the others, is cortisol. So the cortisol hormone. So cortisol impacts our ability to ovulate well and to produce our sex hormones. So cortisol is a hormone produced by our adrenals. And this is a hormone that often is elevated with most women. But again, every woman's different, and she may be experiencing stress because of a work stress. She might be experiencing stress because maybe she's constantly eating food that she has a sensitivity to, and it's causing inflammation, which then causes insulin resistance, which then causes weight gain, which then causes cortisol to increase because her body's under stress. I mean, there is no one simple answer. So again, this very simple question you asked me has a very complicated answer, and that there's always upriver causes for downriver symptoms. And our fertility cycle gives us information about the symptoms, but it doesn't always give us the answer to the upriver. So cortisol is really what started this whole fascination with hormones, this cortisol hormone, because of it's associated with progesterone and because so many women are on progesterone. And then I started thinking more about, well, food sensitivities and gut health, because of what I just said food sensitivities can cause inflammation, insulin resistance, cortisol. So it's a very complicated matter, but if you ask the right questions, you get a lot closer to the answer. And when we know the answer, when we get to, we work ourselves upriver to that root, we really can see transformation where maybe that woman doesn't always have to be on progesterone all the time, because we are getting to the root cause of why she was on it in the first place.
Yeah. Okay. I want to dive so deep into everything that you just said. So let's start with cortisol, because cortisol is a hormone that rises when we're stressed, right? That's kind of my basic understanding of that. So, but I didn't think about the different types of stress that our bodies experience, whether it be, when we think of stress, we think of like, okay, you have a stressful job, or school is stressful, or, an exterior thing is causing you anxiety, right? And that's when I think of stress. But it could also be, from what you said, you're eating something that your body is telling you, I do not like this. And that symptom may be very obvious. And so it's easy to understand, like, oh, okay, I need to go gluten-free because every single time I eat bread, I bloat, or whatever it is. But sometimes the symptoms aren't as easy to see necessarily. And so I think, anyways, with that being said, is cortisol, were you saying that as more of just an example of, okay, that's another hormone that we talk about when it comes to fertility? Or is that like a really is that one of like the bigger things that you would say, like we need to be looking at that when we're seeing low progesterone on your chart? Does that make sense?
Totally. Yes. What
Okay.
you just said, the last part. Well, both parts really important, but cortisol. So you know how everybody has like a camp they live in? You know, they live in the camp of fasting, or they live in the camp of, you know, carnivore, or they live in the camp of, you know, gut health or whatever. You know, in my mind, I don't live in any one camp, but I think about our body, our whole goal, excuse me, our body's goal is to survive always. And survival is like, it's a hierarchy. Our body first and foremost just needs to survive. Beyond anything else, it wants to survive. An example of this even is this. I love this example. I was going to a chiropractor once and they said, okay, close your eyes and march in place. I'm like, okay. And I was closing my eyes and I was marching in place, and they had me do this for like 2 minutes. And all your listeners, and Haley, you could even do this, and you can even ask your kids to do this. It's hilarious because in 2 minutes, you are not in the place where you started. I was like,
yeah.
I walked forward, I walked to the left, I turned around. I mean, I thought
that you were in place, that you were marching in place.
Yes, heavens, yes. I'm like, when I open my eyes, where else would I be? I'm going to be in the place where I began. False. It wasn't the case. The reason I'm bringing up that kind of random example is that our eyes have a lot to, like, us being able to see has a lot to do with our survival. That even when our eyes are open, we, to survive, need our eyes to be completely straight forward. Our head can't be tilted to the side. So again, the way this is pulled together is I was moving around so much when I was closing my eyes because I was crooked, like my hips were off, right? But my body will do everything it can to change everything under the neck, even if it's crooked, so that my head and my eyes can see in front of me, because that's how I'm going to survive, you know, in the jungle. I need to be able to see. So that's just an example of what our body does. It changes so that it prioritizes vision. So that's the same example with cortisol in a sense. Like, it's going to change everything else about our hormones, our function. Our reproductive cycle is a secondary function to survival in terms of being able to survive a bear, you know. And so cortisol is pumped out anytime that we're feeling any sort of emotional stress. So maybe I get an email from my boss, and the last time I got an email from my boss, I was getting fired. This is just an example. This is not a true story.
Thank you for the clarification.
What kind of boss would like fire you through email?
That would be awful. Yeah, you don't want to be working for that person anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, you probably don't want that job. Anyway, so let's just pretend the last time I opened an email from a boss, it was bad news.
Sure.
So now every time a boss emails me, again, this is just an example, I start to feel that like quick heart rate. I start to sweat, perspire, I start to breathe quick. And that is a stress response because of an emotional trigger I have to an email coming in. Now, what happens is my body is sedentary when I'm opening that email. I'm not moving, I'm not running, I'm not burning calories, but my body doesn't know it because it senses danger because of this emotional trigger. So my body's going to respond as though I'm in danger, which means it's sending more sugar to my blood so that I can have the energy my muscles and my brain and my heart need to survive, which then increases. And then cortisol is increased, which makes me want to retain fat because I'm in danger. And so what happens when people are triggered constantly, they are retaining fat. There's so much sugar in their blood. Even you can be insulin resistant, not just based on the foods you're eating. It could be because of stress, insulin resistance. Wow. So cortisol is an umbrella reason why I believe women are stressed, but also because of, like, again, the low progesterone, which as a hormone coach trainer myself, we have to dig in even deeper and ask, well, what's causing that stress? Is it an emotional stress where I have trauma that I need to work through with a therapist, you know, Or is it a physical stress? Maybe my immune system's low. I'm not getting enough vitamin C. My diet is no good. And there's inflammation because I'm always having viruses, which is another reason my body would go into survival. Is it because of a food sensitivity, similar to the immune system example I gave, but our immune system does react when we're eating foods that we may be allergic to or sensitive to, or we have leaky gut. So my body's put in a state of like a threatened state. So again, it might not always feel in those examples of eating foods, that we may be allergic to or sensitive to, it might not always feel like that heart rate sort of thump, 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 thump if you're constantly maybe eating avocado when you have a sensitivity to it. But it does, in fact, increase cortisol and increases inflammation. And again, increases the sugar in our blood, and it can be a huge problem. So that's a lot, Haley. But I hope that I was able to give like some multiple islands, as examples.
Yes. Yeah. So from what I'm understanding then is that cortisol is more of the umbrella, I guess, for lack of better terms. Like that is kind of the top going down. So we're looking at, okay, cortisol affecting, I'm sure, all of our body systems, but talking specifically about the reproductive system. So your body senses, okay, I'm not safe. I mean, we talk about this when we're teaching fertility charting, and we're talking about stress affecting the cycle and delaying ovulation, because your body is literally saying, I am not safe to get pregnant right now because of whatever is happening here. I've always thought of it more as like an emotional stress of some sort of external thing. But now I'm realizing, okay, cortisol can actually rise when you're eating something your body doesn't like, or, other things like that. So I think that's so important to recognize that, okay, cortisol actually is the kind of the main player here, chess piece player. Yeah. And then when you move that, it moves everything else. Yeah. I kind of, if you don't mind, can we just kind of go top to bottom here? Because I'm trying to make sense of, you talked about insulin resistance, you talked about retaining fat, inflammation, gut. I think that you hear these words a lot, but well, at least I do. I hear these words a lot, but trying to make sense of it all, I'm a very linear thinker, and I think a lot of my listeners are too. And so it would be helpful to see, okay, cortisol, if that rises, what happens next? You said, okay, your body retains fat because I'm sure as an evolutionary response, we would need fat if the danger is he didn't kill that elk, and so now we have nothing to eat for the winter, right? Like, so you need to retain fat. But so I'm understanding that. So can you kind of go in a linear example of, okay, if you have cortisol at the top, what's next? Like, is it insulin resistance, or is it fat, or is it inflammation? Can you talk about that linearly?
Yep.
Linearly, is that a word?
Linearly, it is today.
Okay, there you
go. So with hormone function, everything ties into each other. So the way it works as a hierarchy, though, and that, thank you for bringing me back, because that I think was my main point in saying all that, was when we're stressed, when cortisol is high, it means all the other functions don't matter as much. So that means my thyroid will not function as well, because and thyroid produces thyroid hormones. So those hormones are going to suffer because my body's prioritizing the energy to keep me alive, which again is the whole focus of my livelihood, is I want to stay like ticking, Same thing with my reproductive hormones. I'm not going to ovulate, like just used as an example, likely, because that's a secondary function. So everything is kind of focused on just survival. It's also why some people who fast or work out a lot, it stresses their body to the max. So often people who have cortisol issues, they also have thyroid problems and ovulatory problems. So it's not really like first goes this, second goes this, third goes this. It's kind of like, again, the hierarchy thing of just survival in and of itself is going to affect all these other body systems. But unfortunately, what happens is people don't give cortisol enough credit, and they're trying to get pregnant. And maybe they're doing breathing exercises, and maybe and they're doing massage, and they're going on walks, and they're really trying to eat well, and it really has helped them a lot. But what they may not remember is the impact it did have on glands like our thyroid. So it's hard to say, like, first it's this, then it's this, then it's this. I'd say it's more like, if you think about a bubble, cortisol, like think of a circle with cortisol written in the center, and then lots of lines coming out from cortisol is really what it is. It's less about the linear, although it could be, but it's always going to be like circling back and wrapping around and all that whole thing. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of what your listeners could be thinking about is really just thinking, what is my cycle like? Do I have a short luteal phase? Do I have brown bleeding? Do I feel emotionally stressed? You know, am I physically in pain? Am I having a hard time losing weight? Sometimes that is one of the things we hear over and over. I'm having a hard time losing weight. Nothing I do helps me lose weight. Well, we know now that when cortisol is high, when stress is high, your body is going to want to retain fat. It's going to want to retain weight. So then we can start asking ourselves, well, what is causing that cortisol, that high cortisol? And cortisol can be checked. You know, it's a saliva test that you can check cortisol if you're wondering. So it's important to think about, what is assaulting my stress? What's assaulting my peace? Is it emotional? Is it physical, in that maybe I'm working out so long, high intense, and I'm not eating enough calories? Is that maybe the assault of my stress? Is it that I'm not losing any weight at all? I'm not losing weight and I can't figure it out. I always think to myself, like, the women who are eating right, they're eating, you know, the high protein, and they're eating clean dairy and, you know, complex carbs and fruits and vegetables and all these things. And maybe they're eating hard-boiled eggs every day. Maybe they have a sensitivity to eggs and they're eating 2 hard-boiled eggs or more a day. They're doing everything else right. My invitation to them would be, just take one out for like a week or 2. Take out the hard-boiled eggs, replace it with something else. If you're really eating well, managing your stress, you know, moving peacefully with your workout routine, it's likely like a food, you know, food that's triggering. So I know that those are like multiple islands, but I hope what your listeners are thinking about is asking themselves, what could be assaulting my peace, and thinking beyond just the emotional part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely want to get into the practical aspect of that, like elimination diet and going into your hormone coaching program too. Let's put that on hold though, because I want to go back still to, you have cortisol retaining fat. You talked about insulin resistance. Can you go into that a little bit? That is one thing that I think, again, this is something that we hear a lot about, but not too many people truly understand what that means. So can you go deeper into that too?
Sure. So our body can handle certain amounts of blood sugar in our bloodstream, and our cells can accept a certain amount of glucose. But if we're overdoing the sugar intake or the simple carbs that break down to sugars quickly, it can be very overwhelming for our cells to use this as energy. So I think about the Lucille Ball, you know, episode where, you know, I don't know if you remember this, but there's like an assembly line sort of thing where she has to put wrappers on little chocolate truffles. And the chocolate truffles are coming so fast, she can't wrap each of the truffles individually. So that's kind of what it's like. If our intake of glucose is so high, our cells cannot accept them at the rate in which we're bringing it into our body. Now, the part that's often misunderstood by people is, again, especially in the case of not losing the weight, is they may be thinking, but Jamie, I'm eating like clean. I'm not eating high sugar. I'm not really taking in simple carbs. Then I would ask that person, well, in that case, emotionally, how stressed are you? They might be, I'm so stressed out. Like, are you in fight or flight 80% of your day? Or are you in fight or flight 20% of your day? Because we're built to be in fight or flight. Like, we can have that capacity 20% of our day, but 80% should be rest and digest mode. But most Americans, that's flipped. We're in 80% fight or flight and 20% in rest and digest. So what does that mean? It means our body is going to be responding to those anxieties and stresses by pouring sugar into our blood, even if we didn't eat it. We have stored glycogen. We have stored glycogen stores. And so it's poured into our bloodstream. And then in that case, we can become insulin resistant. So it's really about knowing that and then managing the things we're putting in our mouth, but also the way we're processing stress. And then lastly, so we're talking about the emotional parts of stress. We're talking about the foods that we're eating, and we can also talk about food sensitivities. So you know how a lot of people go carnivore, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it solves all their problems seemingly. And while it solves a lot of their problems at first, you want to wonder like what's the longevity of being able to do something like that? And that's the problem. That's a big issue. But the reason why carnivore works is because the foods that often assault us are completely removed from our diet. So if I have a sensitivity to carbs, sugar, certain vegetables or whatever, and I'm just eating meat, who's allergic to meat? I've never met a soul allergic to meat.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I believe that's why people are losing a lot of weight. They're losing the inflammation that they're getting from a food sensitivity. That's why it's dropping so fast. Now, the thing is, how do you do that in a healthy way? How do you bring it back in? And that's a whole other episode. But that's almost like a way to just know if the stubborn weight is caused by food. Is go, talk to your doctor, but go carnivore for a week or two. And if you start feeling great, well, chances are there's probably a food you were eating that's making you feel like garbage,
And at that point, would you just start adding things back in and then see how you feel? And if you start to feel crummy again, then okay, it was that thing that was causing. Okay. Yeah. That's so interesting. Yeah. Because carnivore, my sister-in-law actually went carnivore for a little bit and she felt great, but it's not sustainable. And that's the issue. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you're talking about, insulin resistance, that can be from the things that we're eating, but it can also be caused by stress. Again, going back to cortisol. Okay. Talk a little bit then about inflammation. How does that tie in to all of that? And I know that that's going to also bring in to talk about the gut too. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. I'll say too, this is a good reminder or helpful acronym. So with hormone coaching, I use the acronym GILLIS. That's just like a good way to think of it in your head. So gut, inflammation, liver, adrenals, and how those things all affect our sex hormones. That's kind of the acronym. So with inflammation is systemic. What that means is it doesn't just affect one part of your body. It affects the whole body system. Inflammation does. I'm going to use like one big way that inflammation affects most Americans, beyond what we might think of as like bumping my knee or like in the out, there's inflammation there, or something where there's physical, I got in a car accident. Well, definitely there's inflammation there. That's kind of the obvious way or reason we think about inflammation. But inflammation in terms of hormones, often it's due to the state of our gut. That's like just a big one. So if our gut is unhealthy, we know that because our stools are either too loose or they're too hard. We always say it's the Goldilocks rule. Is it too hard or is it too soft? It just needs to be just right, like a banana. So that's one good clue that I always like to start with in terms of gut health. What is your bowel like, and how often do you go to the bathroom? If it's too loose, likely there's inflammation in the gut. Your body's not absorbing the foods to create, or your body's not absorbing the vitamins and minerals it needs, and it's too fast of a process because of the inflammation in an angry gut for it to form a nice like banana-like stool. And often that's because of what we call leaky gut. And leaky gut is kind of like, I always think about mesh shorts. If you were to stretch mesh shorts, there's like those holes that you can see, like,
the holes. Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I think of when I think of our intestinal lining. It's one cell layer deep, and it can stretch, meaning the things in your gut can exit the gut into the bloodstream, causing inflammation. Anytime anything is in our body that is not meant to be there, it's going to cause inflammation. Always. If you get a splinter ouch, you know, that splinter, right? Have you ever gotten a stupid splinter and it's like the worst feeling and it hurts and it's annoying? Okay, that's your body's inflammatory response sending like, this isn't supposed to be here. So same thing's true when our gut is leaky. Food, like big food particles, bacteria, toxins, they're entering into the bloodstream. The body says, this isn't meant to be here. I'm going to create inflammation so I can attack and get rid of this. And so what happens is if this is happening constantly, because our gut isn't being repaired, it can throw us into an autoimmune state, which means my body's just so used to, it's never getting a break. It's never getting a break at all. So it's kind of an autoimmune condition response, which can trigger autoimmune disease. So with the gut, it's very important, and it causes inflammation due to the state of our gut. So those two I like to combine together. Yeah, we're going through all of them, aren't we? But like even the thyroid, often thyroid disease is an autoimmune disease. So if someone has a thyroid condition, I'm always wondering, what's the state of your gut? Because again, it assaults our thyroid by increasing inflammation when our gut is not keeping what's supposed to be in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so now we're talking about how all of these things are interconnected. Now, getting to the practical level though, let's say, okay, you're having that symptom of your cycle is off. Mm-hmm. Maybe you're having irregular cycles, pain, whatever it is, you're noticing something that's off, and you want to go into this kind of a rabbit trail, honestly, of okay, what is the root cause of this? Because if you go to a regular doctor, they're going to put you on the pill. If you go to a technology doctor, they're probably going to give you progesterone, which is much better than the pill. Yeah, totally. But as you said, it's not getting down to the root of, okay, let's address cortisol, let's address insulin, let's address inflammation, gut. So if somebody wanted to start going down that path of, I want to heal this from truly the ground up, it sounds like there's a lot of ways that like there's a lot of what's the saying, like rocks to uncover, do you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of things to lift up, to look and see, okay, is it under there? Oh, is it under there? So what would you say would be the first thing to do if you're trying to understand I don't want to say what the root cause is, when you're trying to recognize that practically? Like what would you do to understand, is it stress that's playing an issue? Is it food that's playing an issue? Go into that a little bit.
Yeah. So it's what you just said is perfect, because it is so true. Like even in our conversation right now, if there was a specific woman that I was working with who exudes certain symptoms, and then I would be able to more directly work upriver. But even in that case, if we don't know what we're working with exactly, it will definitely be like you're going down 1 billion million rabbit trails. And fortunately and unfortunately, we live in an information age. So information is all around us, and it can be overwhelming, paralyzing. And while many of us can try to restore our health by ourselves, it will be so long and it will drive you crazy, which is why working with a hormone coach is so helpful, because we can go to our doctor and get labs and know maybe what our blood work is saying. But most doctors aren't going to be like, let's figure it out. Like, what's your gut health? Like, what's your gut maps tell us in terms of, what do you have gut dysbiosis, where there's like an overgrown bad bacteria versus good bacteria ratio? So I'd say, so that's one example. Or even hair tissue mineral analysis. In some cases, that's very telling about the state, especially of stress. So a woman has a choice. They have two choices. They have more than that, but out of simplicity's sake, Haley, they have two choices. One, they can try to navigate all of this on their own, and they will have access to information, and they'll have to discern what it is they should start with and kind of trial and error it. And it may take months or years or a lifetime, because again, it's crazy how much information we have. Or they work with a trained hormone coach or professional that can really guide them on a journey that will exponentially decrease the amount of time they spend trying to get to the root cause. And a lot of them is questions, understanding their lifestyle, even understanding their trigger, Haley. Like, I was working with a gal. Her goal is to lose 10 pounds. She has non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, okay? Goal is to lose 10 pounds. And if somebody says, I want to lose 10 pounds, well, the easy answer is don't eat as much. Or the easy answer is, like, eat better, you know?
Yeah.
Like, increase your protein, eat more vegetables. Like, information is easy to say or easy to share, but there's so much more about that woman's story that informs us and how we care for her. So even in sharing all of this with you throughout our episode today, Haley, that's, again, just information, and it's not going to land for anyone unless they're being asked the right questions, and they're truly seen, you know, behind the chart. So this example of this gal, I asked her, I said, you know, and she was a previous collegiate athlete, so she knows how to eat well, and there's a lot of kind of unaddressed trauma in her life. She kind of went to food for kind of self-medicating with food, so that it's a comfort to her. And so really, instead of saying eat less or eat better, we need to think about, when is it that you're feeling triggered, and when is it and what is it that you're grabbing, and let's together create a plan where we're grabbing for something else. So even though there's the root issue of all the gut inflammation, liver, adrenals, even behind that is just the mindset and the unique story of the woman. And that's really what's going to inform us to truly, like, hone in on that woman's story. So it's very hard to do alone, and it's unfortunate that it's so hard to do alone, and it can be done for sure. But a woman's story informs how we care for her.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And I think that's so important, and that not all, even the best of doctors that do want to get to the root cause of it, they don't have the time to be able to sit and, like, hear your story. Not that they don't want to, but it's just like, that's why they have other people teach their patients how to chart their cycles, because they don't have time to do that. So that was what I did for 2 years. I was working at an OBGYN clinic because the doctor themselves didn't have the time to do that. So they hire other people to do that because it's such necessary information. So I think that is a huge blessing that you're training people now on how to help women walk through that root cause path. Now, something that does come to mind, this is maybe more of a personal question, but I'm sure other listeners are either interested or going through this scenario. So I have, and I think I mentioned this on the podcast that we recorded for your podcast, the episode, I have pretty extreme PCOS. You wouldn't know it just by looking at me, but if you look at my cycles, or if you look at my charts, there's bleeding and mucus everywhere. Like, it's so PCOS. And so at this point, I have not done the whole, like, let's address gut issues. Let's like functional medicine. I have not gone down that path yet. To be completely honest with you, money is a huge barrier. It's overwhelm, but it's also, insurance doesn't cover it, right? So there's an issue there. So all of that to say, I'm wondering, where is the line between, because right now I'm thinking about possibly getting the ovarian wedge resection, which is a topic for another day. I'll link for our listeners who want to know more about that surgical procedure. I do have an episode about that procedure with somebody who got that procedure. So I'll link that down below. It's a common, maybe not common actually, but a NAPRO technology surgical procedure for PCOS specifically. But anyhow, I'm, like, thinking about that, but I'm also thinking, well, there's also this other path that I haven't really gone down yet, which is gut health and addressing inflammation and addressing those types of things. So I guess I'm wondering, my question is, where is the line between, I really honestly just need surgery to fix this, or endometriosis? That might be a better example of, like, that is something that surgically needs to diagnose it truly, that needs to be surgically seen and treated. So what is the line between you really do just need surgery or you really do just need like a specific medication versus going down this path of looking deeper into your gut, into your hormones, into the
Cortisol.
cortisol levels? Can you talk a little bit
Sure.
about like what is the difference,
Yeah.
or not difference, but what is the balance there? Like what is the line?
Yep. I just asked that of Dr. Stroud, who we had on the Hormone Genius podcast, and he's a surgeon.
Okay.
And we talked about ovarian wedge resection, Haley. We just released it like a month ago. So
I'll link it then. If you send me the link,
yeah.
I'll link it in the show notes. Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So I asked him that question. I'm like, yeah, how does one know? And he said it's based on the timeline of the woman and literally just what she wants, the severity of it, how long she's been maybe trying to restore her health. So, he's not against restoration in regards to addressing, ovarian health, but he was just saying how, some women are really working to achieve pregnancy and they're unable to, and it's getting frustrating. So it's really just, you think about whatever that goal is for that woman, and then you ask, how much time does she want to spend? So that would be, I guess, tip number one is how much time do you want to spend restoring your health? And he has great outcomes for ovarian wedge resection. Sometimes you just need a reset, and that alone, because I did ask that question. I said, well, do you find that people who get the ovarian wedge resection, let's say lifestyle is an issue, like for some, not for you, Haley, I can tell that.
No,
but, you know what I mean?
We could always do better, we could always do better.
Right. But like maybe there is really a big struggle with weight or anything else,
Right.
with PCOS. And he said, yeah, there's just something to it. Like sometimes you just get that reset. You feel better about yourself. You feel more motivated. And so sometimes it's just needing that as a boost. But I would say in terms of PCOS specifically, again, not knowing the woman's story in particular, I mean, I know a little bit about your story, Haley, but there have been really good outcomes with like the Mediterranean diet, and PCOS.
What is that?
The Mediterranean diet. It's like,
Yeah.
if you think about the people of the Mediterranean, it's the foods that they're eating often. So fish, olive oil, wine, even red wine, dark chocolate, like kind of more like, a lot of veggies and that kind of thing. So the Mediterranean diet, there's so many studies on PCOS and then people who follow the Mediterranean diet and how it naturally decreases inflammation, but also increases fertility and the outcomes of PCOS. So that leads me into also, it's called AIP, the anti-inflammatory protocol. I'm always really hesitant to like cheer on different kinds of protocols that are blanket, just simply because of, every woman is unique.
Mm-hmm.
But if someone was really motivated and wanted to try the AIP is also another route, which is similar to the Mediterranean diet. It's basically just taking out any inflammatory foods. So dairy, gluten, sugar, just all the things we always hear about all the time. So It's eating for your health, and it's taking away, again, the foods that are inflammatory, like even red meat, that would be considered inflammatory.
Okay.
So to answer your question, I would say, giving that a whirl, and I would set a deadline, like, okay, starting in November or whatever, for 1 month, I'm going to eat an anti-inflammatory diet. I'm going to see what happens with my cycle. And I'm going to see, does it regulate? And then maybe I'm feeling good, but that might be too short of a time. So then I want to try 2 cycles worth, just based on that relationship you're having with the food and the restrictions. I think it's important because we can all get really obsessed with things. I'm speaking about myself, especially, but you can get really obsessed and almost like in a trance with food stuff, especially as a woman. And it can really wreak havoc in lots of ways, emotionally and spiritually. So I think it's important to understand the mindset, the motivation before really like going hardcore with restriction diets, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think it's helpful too to put a time limit to it. That's not something that I had previously thought of, saying like, okay, I'm doing this for even just 2 weeks to see if I can. And then even just getting that motivation. Now, I want to ask though, is you said let's do it for a cycle. So let's say, a month. Is that long enough to like to switch a diet to really see if it makes a change, because we know that your eggs are starting to mature even at 3 months before you actually ovulate it, right? So is a month a long enough time to see if there's a change?
I think it depends on who you ask. So I think
Okay.
in terms of like fertility outcomes, because like you're saying, it does take 3 full months, for like that full reset of the new eggs that it will
Sure.
develop over the course of the time. But if you do ask, like the professionals, and when I say that, I say it tongue in cheek, like basically
Mm-hmm.
what I listen to on podcasts, but they're like, literally, you will notice, like you'll notice in a month, you'll notice. And whatever they notice is, I guess, up to the person noticing. Are you more awake? Do you feel more alive? So maybe the fertility outcome won't be as positive in terms of, oh, I've ovulated now, but maybe it's, I feel better, my skin is clearer, maybe more of that would be a good measuring stick.
Okay. Yeah, that's super helpful. Okay, before we end our time, I want you to go into your hormone coaching program, because with all of this being said, yes, you 100% need somebody to walk you through this, because as we've talked about, there's so much to be uncovered, and I think it is a really, really good and huge blessing that we have people that are trained to walk you through this process so that you're not doing it alone, so it's not taking forever, and that you can really, get right down into it, have a coach. So literally coach, right? So tell us more about the hormone coaching program. I know you have a cohort coming up soon. So what is this thing? What
Yeah.
is a hormone coach?
Yeah. Okay. Hormone coach coaches women in light of their fertility cycle. So again, they're coaching on hormone health, education on the fertility cycle, what lifestyle factors, how can we biohack or cycle sync to the genius of our fertility cycle for our health. But even beyond that, that's just half of what a hormone coach does. The other half of what a hormone coach does is, I call it the Fiat way coaching methodology. And that's activating our feminine genius to really intuit and understand the questions to ask, to really reveal areas of healing that may be emotional healing. And we're not therapists, but even just feeling loved can be healing. Feeling seen and heard can be healing. So it's really like a 1-2 punch, but a good punch. Maybe that's not a good example.
I'm following. I'm tracking.
Yeah, it's like a 1-2 thing, because again, I'm just really stuck on this whole, like, the noisiness of the world, and it's so overwhelming. It's so overwhelming, and so to constantly be hearing different fads, and especially if we're somebody who gets into the fad. I mean, that's hard to then constantly. What happens is women lose trust with themselves. And that's a hard thing to restore, and it's hard to do it alone. So again, a hormone coach also helps to create goals, like accountability. So we call them GRACE goals instead of SMART goals. Although SMART goals are great, GRACE is just a different take on it. So really, we're a hormone support sister, a hormone doula, somebody to really accompany that woman, from beginning to end. Depending on the hormone coach, depends on how long she chooses to work with the clients, because every woman who's trained as a hormone coach, she has her own business by the end of the program. It's a 6-month program. At this point, it's $54.97 to be trained, certified. So that's hormone education, that's hormone coaching, hormone application. And then there's also a Fiat business incubator for women who need more of like that one-on-one touch for building the business. But I'd say that the very unique part of our program, Haley, is that I want our hormone coaches to feel so confident about what they learn and know that when they speak, they ignite the hearts of the women they speak to. Because when we hear truth and when we hear goodness and when we feel hope, our heart burns, like in a good way.
Yeah.
And so that is the unique part of our hormone coaching program. So if any of your listeners feel like they want to be a part of this cultural shift that women so desperately need in this world, whether the world's just noisy, which obviously was shown earlier in this episode, there's 1 billion million things that to know, and many things more that we don't know yet. So it's, how do we even do this, by ourselves? So if you feel called to accompany women, if you feel called to be a voice in this culture, and to just, follow that, that call of your heart to be a part of something bigger than you. The Fiat Institute, we have a Fiat sisterhood, and you are more than welcome to set up a call with me. There's an application process, and we can include those things in the show notes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have a cohort coming up in January, correct?
January, yeah. Spots are limited, but we're still accepting applications. And January to July, January through June really is the training program. And then we're also partnered with FEM. So if somebody wants to continue through the process and get a discount through FEM, my hormone coach course manager through Fiat Institute also works for FEM. So she takes the students and continues the process with them, so that then they walk away not just being a hormone coach, but also being a FEM trained educator.
That is like that's the cream of the crop. Like, that is the best. If you can teach women how to chart their cycle, and then also teach them about what those signs are showing, and let's dive into that too. Oh my gosh, praise God for what you're doing and what your coaches are doing, because that is what is going to help women. Like that exactly right there.
Totally.
So that is amazing. Well, Jamie, if somebody wanted to find you, how could they do that?
Yeah, they go to fiatinstitute.com. So that's my website. HormoneGenius.com is my co-host Teresa Kenny's and I's podcast. So HormoneGenius.com. Follow us on your podcast app, and you can always email me at jamie@fiatinstitute.com. I would love to get on a call. And again, anyone who has interest, I do take 15-minute phone calls with, if they're wanting to learn more about the program. So I can also include that.
Okay, awesome. Well, Jamie, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Yes, thanks, Haley.
Thanks for listening to the Truth and Fertility Podcast. If you are enjoying this content, please leave a 5-star review. That helps me tremendously. For more information about learning to chart your fertility cycle, you can visit truthandfertility.com, and I'll talk to you guys again next week.